And how you doing? How you living? How you feeling, folks? Back for another episode of City Night Lights. Now, of course, I'm your host, Idiot Number Zero. My name's Zach, and as always, I'm glad to be back talking to you guys. Now, this is gonna be a fun episode. Was on a little bit of a hiatus during a very fun time. Was at a bachelor party out in Nashville. During the crazy ice storm of 2026. So it took a little bit to get back here, had some work things to take care of, and now, ready to talk some baseball with you guys. The Mets have had a very, very exciting last couple weeks. First, it started off with acquiring Bo Bichette, then Luis Robert Jr., and to cap it all off, Freddie Peralta. Now, all of these acquisitions, I'm so happy that we finally did something positive, and we did a lot of something positive. So it feels really cool to be sitting in this position now with the guys that are on the squad. But I think one question a lot of people have are not necessarily about Peralta, but how does, a guy like Bo Bichette fit into this squad? And, what's Robert going to look like come season time? And, kind of how is this going to play out? Are we going to sign Freddie Peralta long term, or is he going to be a one and done with the Mets, after giving up a haul? But lots of questions to be answered, and we're going to get there shortly. But, we're going to do our little thing that we normally do. I'm going to run through what the episode's going to look like exactly. First, we'll talk about Bo. Then we'll talk about Robert. Then we'll hit Peralta. There's another fun name I want to mention after Peralta, not significant news. And then we'll kind of talk about what's next, for the Mets this offseason. Is there a next? Is there anything else? So, with that being said, that's what our schedule is going to look like, and we'll get right into it. So, Bo Bichette has signed a 3-year, $126 million deal with the New York Mets. Now, it is a $42 million per year deal with an player opt-out at the end of each year. So that's going to definitely be interesting to see what Bo Bichette does, after the season, if he's another one-and-done free agent guy, or if he's going to stick around for maybe another year. I personally think this is going to be a 2-year contract for Bo Bichette. Play age 28 and 29 at your, $42 million AAV. Really can't get much higher than that, and then go get your long-term contract. Take it till you're 37 and can't beat something like that. Sets you up for the rest of your life. But Bo Bichette, he's only ever played shortstop in the MLB. Obviously the Mets have Francisco Lindor playing shortstop, so Bo Bichette will not be playing shortstop this upcoming season for the New York Mets. And I'm not exactly sure I like him fitting in at third base either. He doesn't particularly have a strong arm, and he hasn't been known to be a particularly rangy defender. So I'm a little intrigued to see how that third base switch is going to go for Bo Bichette. If he's going to be able to become a slightly better third base defender, at the hot corner. I really don't know what that's going to look like yet, and that's definitely something I think with this deal that scares me a little bit, because it moves someone who I thought was becoming a pretty decent fielding third baseman in Brett Beatty to a different spot in the field. So that's going to be kind of a weird question mark with this signing. But one thing that's definitely not going to be a question mark with this signing is the hitting. He has a career 120 OPS plus, so he's 20% better than your average hitter every year on average. He's consistently had a high batting average, hitting close to 300 year in and year out. You got to love to see that. He's also been able to kind of hit towards all fields. He's not like a specific one side of the field hitter. He's not a pull hitter. He's not he can hit all over the place, really spread the field for the Mets, which is awesome. And I expect to see him also get a couple steals on this team. He's been able to have seasons where he's had 25 steals, 13 steals. I could see him get into the double digits again after not reaching that after the last 3 years. Hasn't been able to hit the double digits, but I could very much see him getting back to that. Now, I do expect Bo Bichette to be like a 20 home run, 80 RBI guy, get a lot of runs, getting a ton of hits. He's led the league in hits twice in his 7-year career. So definitely something you can expect from him. And I'm really excited to get a hitting machine back on this roster. It kind of felt like we missed that last year. We didn't have a lot of guys, with the ability to play that small ball game. And that often hurt us with, the solo shot home runs, or you never saw anything more than a 2-run home run, but it was only almost every time it was just a solo shot. And you're like, guys, we got to capitalize, get some runs on these home runs. So glad to see a guy that's really going to get on base and hopefully score those runs. That's something that's going to be crucial for this Mets team coming up in 2025 or this 2026 season. So there may be a couple injury concerns here. He has dealt with some lower body injuries over the last couple years, and really throughout his career, it's just been lower body injuries. Now, he's not the most injured player in the world. He has, out of his 7 years, 4 years, you can over 139 games played. I'm more than happy with that, but there are a couple years, his first 2 years, I won't attribute to really anything outside of maybe some injury. Maybe he was just young, 21, 22, not getting everyday play time. But in 2024, we did see him go out with an injury stint, and in 2025, we did see towards the end of the year he was injured but was able to return for some of the playoffs and be an absolute beast for them come playoff time. So just something to look out for, but this short-term deal definitely helps. Now, granted, if he's injured for a large part of the season, I would definitely expect him to, for him to be retained by the Mets organization. Just doesn't seem like he's going to really want to leave that $42 million deal. So at least we have some assurance there that if we don't get a full season of Bo Bichette this year, at least we'll have him one more year and we can take another shot at it. But it's going to definitely be interesting. I will say, after the signing of Bo Bichette and looking at what our infield kind of looks like, it does make me feel like if you just signed Pete Alonso, do you need Bo Bichette? Because Beatty's playing third, Simeon's at second, Polanco's your DH, and Pete would be your first baseman. It just feels like we might not have needed to go out and get Bo Bichette had they just retained Pete Alonso. Now I know the Mets don't believe Pete Alonso is going to age well, but, definitely someone that's been a fan favorite, a captain of sorts for this team, unofficial, but someone as a fan, we all really rallied behind. Feels like that could have kind of been the quick fix for this, is just to have signed Pete and not even get into this situation. But, like we talked about in a couple episodes ago, it really seemed like Stearns just wanted to turn over the roster. This roster full of stars just wasn't getting it done, never really accomplished any of the goals they wanted to hit, and I think, this is just part of what Met fans will see in a couple years as the great reset for this franchise. So, that's kind of all I have with Bo Bichette. Great hitter, a little inconsistent in the field, but we're going to see what happens there. Now we'll move on to Luis Robert. Robert, great player, very excited to get him on the squad. Different type of guy, hasn't been super effective from the batter's box in the last couple years, but more to come soon. I think this is a guy who's going to really come into his own this year. A little bit less pressure on him. He's not going to be batting 2 or 3 in the lineup. He's not going to be the only run producer on the team. There's plenty of other guys that are here to hit, that are here to protect Robert. So that's going to be very exciting. Hopefully he's able to bounce back from these last 2 kind of atrocious seasons, batting below 230. It's just been rough. But he is a phenomenal fielder. He has won a Gold Glove before, plays a phenomenal center field, has the speed to match. So that's going to be something very exciting. We're really able to plug in someone that, at the worst, if he's not able to hit, can get steals and can make great fielding decisions and just great plays in the field, which is really going to help unlock this Mets team, which had some defensive issues last year. Definitely will shore us up there on that end. I do expect him, though, to get like 30 steals this year. He had 33 steals last year, 23 the year before that, 20 the year before that. I do expect him to be a stolen base type of guy. We're probably going to see him hit further back in the lineup this year, closer to that 6 through 8 hole, just because I think they want to make sure he gets his swing back. And, this is someone I could really see be a lineup climber during the season, make his way from the 7-8 spot all the way up to, maybe the 3-4 spot. Really could be an effective righty bat, especially on a team that's full of switch hitters and lefties. Having that righty power bat would be awesome to plug him in the middle of the lineup. Now, we didn't give up a ton to get Robert. We give up Luis Angel Acuna Jr. and Truman Pauly. Truman Pauly was a single A guy, fairly young player. I think he must have been picked recently, but very happy that this is all it took to go get Robert. We didn't have to give up a Vientos. We didn't have to give up a Mauricio. We were able to get this deal done for fairly cheap, and really something else that I don't think a lot of people think about is that Acuna Jr. was on he didn't have any more minor league options, so they couldn't send him down. He was going to have to be on the pro roster this season, so, with that logjam at second base, that really helped free up, some of that logjam and give us an effective player that's going to be well needed on this team, a defensive center fielder with the ability to really have some pop and ability in that bat, and has shown it in the past for a couple of seasons while on the White Sox. So very, very excited to see Robert. I think this is going to be a bounce back season. I think me and many professional analysts alike think that he just needs a change of scenery, a team that, is focused on winning, to really get him back into the groove of things. So we'll keep it moving and grooving. We're going to move down to Freddie Peralta. Now, this is the biggest thing that the Mets have done all season. They went out and got a frontline pitcher. Now, it did cost them prospects Jet Williams, who I believe was number 30 in MLB's top 100 pipeline, and Brandon Sprout, who was rounding out that 100 pipeline. These were two really high-end prospects the Mets gave up to go get Freddie Peralta, but it was something needed if they wanted to be able to make the run they think they're going to be able to make this year, a deep playoff run with World Series aspirations. So to get a guy like Peralta means a lot to the Mets, especially a guy who's he's just a very, very effective pitcher year in and year out. The last 3 seasons alone, he has at least 200 Ks per season with 165 innings to match per season. So you're getting 30 starts out of him every single year, which is awesome. To have that reliability up front, that consistent reliability is huge. This guy's going to be able to go out there every 5th day and give you a solid 6-inning performance. You can't ask too much more from a starting pitcher like that, a guy that's going to be able to really hold the other team down and, allow this lineup to get easy wins, which is the hopeful goal with Freddie Peralta. Now, he has had a sub-3 ERA. He had a sub-3 ERA last year. I don't know if that'll persist. He has done it one other time in his career where he was also an All-Star, which was 2021. But normally he does sit at about a 3.5 ERA. He's not necessarily always the absolute epitome of pitching, but I think, moving to New York with this type of team, I think, we could really see Freddie Peralta come into his own on this squad and hopefully maintain that sub-3 ERA. That would be really, really cool. Now, I will say, something that the Mets struggled with last year is really getting pitchers to get through those 5th, 6th, 7th innings, really saving the bullpen for the innings where it counts. And Freddie Peralta, his one downside is that he averages about 6 innings flat a game. Now, he'll get you to I appreciate him getting us to the 7th. That's definitely going to help because of the amount of strain we put on our bullpen last year just by, not being able to get out of the middle of the 4th or getting out of the middle of the 5th and really then relying on our bullpen to pitch half the game. I think Freddie Peralta, just because he's been so efficient and effective in the past, I think he'll be able to at least maintain that, get those 6 innings averaged per game. And that'll be crucial for the Mets, just like I said, to save their bullpen, something that they were not able to do last year, and we saw how that affected us down the stretch. So I'm excited to see Peralta. Now, something I think the Mets did talk to him about was, working on an extension. I personally don't see an extension getting done before the season, just because, Freddie Peralta was already on what was considered a very team-friendly deal, and he had actually signed this deal with David Stearns in Milwaukee in I think that was right around 2020, 2019. So I don't expect Freddie Peralta to, get excited about extension talks right now. I think that's going to be something he's going to hold off for until after the season. But I don't think that means the Mets are out by any means. Let's see if this guy likes it. Let's see how this season goes. That's just going to be something that we're going to have to truthfully just wait for and be patient, because only time will tell if we're going to be able to retain Freddie Peralta. Now, those were our 3 big acquisitions. Bo Bichette, our new third baseman, assumingly. Luis Robert Jr., our new center fielder, and Freddie Peralta, our new number 1 starting pitcher. Now, the Mets did sign another relief pitcher, but this is kind of a fun thing. The Mets, they went out, they signed Craig Kimbrell, they gave him a spring invite. I love to see it. He wasn't too great in 2020. In 2025. It was actually not. He just was not awesome. Wasn't the Craig Kimbrell of old, but you're not gonna get that out of a 38-year-old. It's just not possible. But he did have a good 2024 season. Is someone who can still be relied on for some of those higher leverage, appearances. And I would love to see Craig Kimbrell, get a chance to compete at a spring training. So I'm very excited to see how he does. He might be a guy who pitches a month for us, gives us some solid innings, and then, kind of fades into MLB past. But he also could be someone who gives us a phenomenal year and really helps this team excel into the playoffs in the upcoming 2026 season. Now, are the Mets done yet? Is this offseason over? Is it concluded? I don't think so. I think there's a couple more things the Mets are going to do, and just really for depth to position themselves in a way that will allow them to really feel comfortable with some of the younger players like Jonah Tong and Carson Bench potentially entering this roster this upcoming year. And I also think it, could just help ease the tensions of some players that might not have performed to what Mets fans would consider the premier standard of the now Steve Cohen era. So I think that we're going to see the Mets, make a move on an outfielder, a guy that's going to be able to really step in if Benj isn't ready, and, just make it so that Tyrone Taylor doesn't have to be the next up option if Benj isn't ready, or if someone gets hurt, he's not the first guy we have to go, yes, you're now a full-time starter until this injury is over. As a Met fan, that's just something that scares me a little bit. I don't want to see Tyrone Taylor really enter that lineup too often. He's a great defender, but just really doesn't have a great ability to use that twig. Has been a consistent, right about 200 hitter in terms of average. Not someone, like I said, I really want to see out there. What is Tyrone Taylor? I'm like, geez, I can't remember his name all the time. Tyrone Taylor. Awesome, I messed that up. But to keep going, I think Mets do have a couple options in terms of, what they want to do to fill that spot. And I think a guy like Starling Marte, if you can bring him back, maybe he's going to be a little healthier after a full offseason. Obviously has been great for the Mets clubhouse. I think he's a guy that we could see return, friends with Soto. Some of the young guys gravitate towards him. I think Starling Marte could be a fun add for this roster. Has been here for a little over 4 years, so I think an easy plug and play, Starling Marte. Plus, there were times last year where he was the best freaking hitter on the team. Let's not forget that. Like, Starling Marte might be a 38-year-old left fielder, but doesn't mean he still can't give us absolutely phenomenal seasons. I mean, in 2022, he was still able to give us a MVP-esque-ish caliber season where he was on the ballot, So I really hope the Mets are able to retain Starling Marte and really plug him back into this lineup, because he was a fun guy, really a fun ad, and can be a very cheap value add for this team, and not just the field, but, the clubhouse as well. Now, other guys that are rumored, I've heard Austin Hayes' name floated out there. Had some time with the Orioles, not great. I believe he was most recently on the Reds, wasn't phenomenal. Yeah, was most recently on the Reds, wasn't that great. I mean, look, he fills the void, right? He's someone that is still relatively young, going to be entering his age 30 season. He still has something to give you, right? He's had some decent seasons in the past, and it doesn't mean that they're all gone. So he's definitely a above Tyrone Taylor level replacement, in terms of just being able to hit and field competently. So that would be awesome. I wouldn't necessarily mind him on a cheap deal. Another guy would be like a Randall Grutchick. Similar build, definitely more of a hitter than a fielder, but still provides you something, in the field. So he wouldn't be a bad deal. I've also heard Lars Nootbaar's name thrown out there. He's currently an outfielder that plays for the Cardinals. Now, Lars is a fun player. He's just hasn't really come into his own yet. He's a 28-year-old, has had some really cool, outings, has had some cool highlights, but really just hasn't been able to be the baseball player I think he knows and wants to be. But doesn't mean that he wouldn't be a great ad for the team. Now, you would have to trade for him, so he's going to come at a price. But I don't necessarily hate that, and honestly, I don't have his contract details up, and nor am I going to be able to get them fast enough. But I think he could also be somebody who's probably on some type of non-tender in terms of like, he's got an ARB deal for the next 4 years because he's only had so many years in the league. Let's see. I was able to get his thing up. Okay. So, yeah, if you were to acquire him this year, you'd have him for one more year of arbitration before he becomes an unrestricted free agent. I don't hate that. I really think that could be a fun ad, and, maybe you end up keeping him instead of Tyrone Taylor next year. Could be cool, but might not be the most worthwhile ad for this team if they have to give up more prospects. Now, I did want to mention, I do think the Mets are going to go out there and get another bullpen guy. Some people also want to get another starter. I don't know how realistic that would be, but we'll quickly go through some starters that I think would be fun for the Mets to go out and get. Really could add some value to the bottom of this rotation. Could even potentially cause a Clay Holmes to re-enter the bullpen, which could really be effective for the Mets down the stretch. But some of these starting pitchers that could be fun, you have a Jordan Montgomery who didn't work out in Arizona but has had some great years, between the Yankees and Milwaukee. You could look at a Chris Bassett, someone who had a phenomenal 1 year with the Mets and has played great on the Blue Jays ever since. Had some great playoff success with the Blue Jays on this most recent run. So that could be a lot of fun to try and get him back on the squad. I'm a huge fan of Tomoyuki Sagano from the Orioles, starting pitcher that came over from one of the Asian leagues. I think this guy could be really fun. He had a pretty decent year last year, ground ball pitcher. So just a fan, of Sagano's work. So would love to see him in the blue and orange. And then Griffin Canning is another starter. He's probably the last starting pitcher I really want to mention because he had such a great year with us up until the Tommy John surgery. I'm surprised the Mets haven't been like, hey, we'll bring you back on a 2-year vet min, see if your arm can get back into, throwing fashion and see what you can do. I think he could be a really great value add, someone who had a lot of success on this Mets staff, before he got hurt. So there are going to be some relievers I want to talk about, and I think this is the more important thing. The Mets are still, in need of another reliever or two. When you lose a guy like Edwin Diaz and a guy like Tyler Rogers, it's hard to fill the void. Those are two great all-star level pitchers, and really, Diaz being probably the best closer in the league, it's a big hole that they left, and the Mets have to find a way to fill it. They really do. There's no getting around that. Now, they have done some work this offseason. They went out and got Devin Williams. They got Luke Weaver. They got a Luis Garcia, who I'm not ultra familiar with. And I do like the acquisition of Tobias Harris in the Freddie Peralta deal. I think Tobias Harris was a super awesome ad, to be honest with you. Just because he's still fairly young, still has some team control, and has shown to be successful from the bullpen spot in the MLB. So that's really awesome. Luis Garcia. Who is this guy? Luis Garcia. I mean, he's a longtime MLB reliever, has had some success, has had some really down years. Maybe he'll be something. He seems like another camp ad. You see if he has anything left in the tank between him and Brazuban and see what happens, because somebody's definitely going to get cut out of that bullpen. We really just got to reshore this bullpen and make every single pitcher count. So, between him, Brazuban, and Kimbrel, I don't think all three of them are going to make this roster. But I do think there are some important ads. Currently we only have Brooks Raley is the only healthy lefty that's in our bullpen. AJ Minter coming off of a lat surgery is expected to be healthy for early April, June. Sorry for the word soup. So we'll see what happens there. I really hope we get a speedy recovery out of Minter, someone who's had a lot of success pitching against us in Atlanta. So I hope to see that similar success for the Mets. But they could really use a lefty, and I think two guys that fit the bill that are still available on the free agency board would be, Andrew Chafin, someone the Mets who have been rumored to acquire in the past, a fun lefty who's played a little bit all over, has had a lot of success, and I think could really be a great value add for the Mets. Or another lefty who most recently had a great season with the Twins, and Danny Colomé. He had a great season, not a super hard-throwing lefty, but definitely has some fun stuff and is able to get you to miss, and could be just another great add to this Mets bullpen, who seemingly is lacking seemingly is lacking a lot of lefty talent. So I think that could really help. Maybe they want to go out there and get a guy like Evan Phillips from the Dodgers, a fast, flame-throwing righty who really can be another nice add to this pen, which seemingly doesn't have a lot of hard throwers left. So that could be a lot of fun. Change the arm angle and velocity a little. Another guy I think that could be a lot of fun would also be like a Michael Kopech. Has had some bullpen experience, has had some starting experience. Hasn't really had a ton of sustained success, but has had a lot of short-term success. I think this could be someone who is a perfect fit into the Mets bullpen. We could see him extend it out for 2-3 innings at a time. Someone who can command the ball for multiple innings from the bullpen spot. I think that would be an incredibly valuable thing for the Mets to have, and something that's clearly obtainable this offseason. So I would love to see them potentially maybe, personally, I would like a dual signing here. I would love for them to get Kopech and Chafin, but we'll see what happens. I think the best in terms of relievers would be like maybe they get Evan Phillips and Chafin. I think that's realistic, but I would definitely like to see 2 relievers picked up in this spot. Sorry for the word soup at the end there, guys. I was going so cleanly, and then all of a sudden I just forgot how to speak. But I do want to say thank you guys so much for coming out, listening to me talk some Mets. I'm very excited for this team right now. We're going to get some more Mets content coming out and on the way to you guys very shortly. Talk about the lineup, talk about, what we think this season output's going to look like right now. But really, if there are any other moves that are going to be made by the Mets, I will talk about them. We'll hop on. We'll, get a little discussion going. So be on the lookout. Now, with that being said, thank you guys for taking the time to, listen to me talk Mets, talk shop, have a good time with it. It's always nice to get to talk Mets with y'all. But with that being said, take it easy and stay idiotic.